Welcome, everyone. The webinar will begin shortly and will be recorded. Connect with the campaign for grade level reading on social media. On Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. On Facebook, follow us at Campaign for GLR. And on LinkedIn, subscribe to us again at Campaign for GLR. Please use hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to tweet anything you learn from today's webinar, and we'll be sure to retweet. We encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Once again, we'd love to connect, so give those pages a follow, and the webinar will begin shortly. Okay, once again, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I'll be behind the scenes helping to produce this conversation. I have just a few housekeeping details before we get started. First, we would love for you to introduce yourself, so please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city or state, and your organization. Be sure when responding to select both panelists and attendees so that we all know who is here. The webinar is being recorded and live streamed on Facebook. The recording, as well as any slides and resources shared during the conversation, will be shared in a follow-up email to all who registered. And finally, we'll be having a brief on-screen evaluation during closing and highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. I'd also like to encourage all of you to join us in some of our upcoming webinars. Next week, we'll have a session on preventing burnout and resignation by investing in teacher coaching and support. On March 7th, we'll have an exciting doubleheader. First, a funder-to-funder conversation co-sponsored with the Bezos Foundation on digital access and telehealth at 12:30 Eastern, and then followed by a session at 3 p.m. Eastern, co-sponsored by New America, on promoting impactful teaching and learning in kindergarten. Registration and information will be posted in the chat box, and we hope you can join us. And finally, just wanted to call your attention to our What's Working exchange form. This link is going to be posted in the chat box now. We are gathering information about a few strategies related to learning loss recovery. The form is quick and easy to complete, and it will help us understand what's happening in our communities. Again, we encourage you to fill out that form, and thank you in advance for your participation. Joining you now is Hattie Miles-Polka, Senior Consultant with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you. Hello all, and welcome to our webinar today, Early Learning Innovation in a Time of Crisis, in partnership with Early Learning Nation magazine and the Bezos Family Foundation. I am particularly excited about today's session, as it's always rejuvenating to hear about bright spots and success stories from different parts of the country. Early care and learning is a field in crisis. There's really no other way to put it. Wages are low in spite of rising costs of childcare and preschool. Professionals are leaving their positions. Accessibility is an issue, both in terms of program existence and other challenges like geographical location, economic means, and more. Yet there are these bright spots we can look to for inspiration and models for collaborative change and innovation. Today, you will hear from Kenya Pinela about El Bucecito, a mobile preschool program in Colorado's Valley Settlement. Next, Jennifer Headley-Nordman will talk about First Steps Kent and how this county in Michigan used the power of coalition to secure local tax funding for early care and learning. We will also learn from Andrea Serrano about New Mexico's Amendment 1, passed with 70% approval, guaranteeing the right to early childcare and early education. As a reminder, you'll be able to find longer bios for the speakers and our moderator in the document that will be linked in the chat. I'm now thrilled to introduce our moderator, Lee Giangreco. Lee is a journalist based in Chicago, and she's been a contributor of Early Learning Nation magazine since 2020, and she is graciously taking us through today's conversation. Lee, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Hattie. Really appreciate that great introduction. So yes, as we mentioned, Kenya Pinela is the Director of Programs and Innovation at Valley Settlement, a nonprofit serving the rural Aspen to Parachute program of Colorado, where she's worn many hats, from babysitter to community organizer, family educator, and program manager. So we're so happy to have her with us today. Kenya, thanks again.
Hi, Lee. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for inviting us to participate.
Well, we're so excited to talk to you. Early Learning Nation did a great story about a program that you helped kick off called El Bucecito. So first of all, maybe just tell us a little bit about this program and what was the catalyst behind it?
Absolutely, I would love to. Um, as you know, everyone kind of heard a little bit about our where we are and where we're located. One of the biggest things within our region is that we have one of the largest wealth disparities in the country, ranging from Aspen to Parachute. And so our mission is truly to listen to Latina families and together create opportunities for early childhood, adult education, connection, and growth so that children and families can thrive. Um, we originally launched, oh, thank you for putting those beautiful pictures up because it's always so hard to imagine this. But we originally launched with a grant from the W.K. Kellogg Foundation back in 2011. The founders set out to understand the experiences of primarily the low-income immigrant families living in the rural community of our Roaring Fork Valley. And so really bilingual Latina community organizers set out on a listening campaign, talking to families in their homes and churches and laundromats and coffee shops and any other community spaces that were safe to truly understand their dreams for their children and for their families and what barriers they were experiencing in our community to achieve those dreams. And at the same time, staff met with local nonprofits and government agencies to see how they were reaching, or in many cases, failing to reach the local Latina community. These conversations, we learned that 1% of preschool age children in these homes were actually enrolled in preschool. And when we dug a little bit further, we really uncovered all the reasons that traditional preschool settings don't work well for many Latino families in our communities. Many parents experienced barriers to access of center-based preschools, including cost, unpredictable work schedules, lack of transportation, and it was also really important for parents to understand and to be able to build that trust with their children's teacher, which was challenging when they didn't speak the same language. And so, families felt really disconnected from their older children's schools. And so we were able to speak to their children's teachers and administrators, and they had a difficult time being able to do that. And so in response, we were able to develop two initial programs. One of them being our parent mentor program, which brought the Latina and Latino volunteers into classrooms to support children and teachers. But the second one was our mobile preschool bus, El Bucecito, which really brings free bilingual preschool directly into neighborhoods via the little buses, or bucecitos, which is a beautiful Spanglish word that our original participants actually came up with. And so we were able to gut it and retrofit it to travel around our community and to be able to give that access to preschool to all of the kids that we serve.
Yeah, and before we were talking about just how beautiful these photos are and how fun these buses look and everything. So it seems like it's a really great thing for the kids and for everyone participating. I'm curious, though, you talk about these listening tours, how much you learned about the community and the challenges they were facing from these tours. But what did it take just to put those listening tours together? Did you have any kind of framework before that? Another organization that maybe you spoke with that did something similar at all? I mean, obviously you had to get Spanish speakers on this as well in order to really interact with the community.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is one of the most important aspects for us. And I think it was grounding in what has made us successful today, is that our community was able to identify with somebody that looked like them and spoke like them. That's such a great question because there's actually a few examples across the country of mobile preschool programs. It definitely was not something that came from us as an original idea, but one of which is actually really close to us right next door in our neighboring Eagle County. which was really great because we were able to visit and get ideas, learn a little bit more about what the space and the structure actually would look like. And so then when we were able to get a bus that was donated to us, we were able to retrofit it more into becoming that mobile preschool classroom. And, you know, to be really honest with you, the first couple of years was just a lot of experimenting, a lot. And, you know, we were trying to figure things out, and everything was in correlation with our families and seeing what would actually work with their schedules, understanding who our partners would be, the neighborhood components of everything. And so it was really important. And it really wasn't until like maybe by the second or third year that we were able to develop kind of what our own bilingual curriculum would look like. And that's something that's continued to evolve throughout the years. And we knew that we really wanted to focus heavily on play-based learning. We wanted to focus heavily on language, on cognitive, social, emotional development, as well as early literacy and math. So.
Yeah, it sounds like it was a lot of work to put that together, even just logistically. I'm thinking like to retrofit these buses. Who's putting that together?
Yeah, you know, we have a local partner. He is great. His name is Lucas Bethel, and he's actually been able to really support us in designing these mobile spaces. And we've gone through a couple of buses now. So it's been really good to understand just like what we need, what makes kids feel comfortable, what makes teachers feel comfortable. We do have a 2 teachers to 8 children ratio. And you know, they are the smaller ones, so they're not the bigger buses. So we've just been able to kind of together try to come up with the most creative space and really use what we have. So you can see here, like we use everything from the ceiling all the way to the ground, being able to access every single space.
And you mentioned this a little bit earlier when you were talking about what you learned initially from the listening sessions in terms of where the gaps were in the community. So I'm curious, what other programs with Valley Settlement have now come out of El Bucecito and out of these listening sessions that you guys had?
Yeah, that's such a good question. You know, listening is truly one of our values. And it's so deeply, incredibly important to us because we would not be here if it wasn't for the families that we serve. And so it's so important for us always to understand what it is that our families are needing. How can we eliminate and reduce barriers and really co-create a program that just, you know, works together and works for the best of the ability to the families that we serve. And so our Bucecito, you know, it's such a great and unique program, and so much was able to come from it. 2 examples is, you know, when we were doing our mobile preschool bus, one of the things that we noticed is that families were coming and they were dropping off their 3 or their 4-year-olds, and then you know, they had another baby in their arms and they would go home and then wait for the 2.5 hours and come back and pick up their kiddos. And so we started recognizing, and we kind of co-created another program alongside the Bucecito to really create a pathway that focused primarily on 0 to 3, which is our Learning with Love program. And it's a program designed primarily for all of the women that have children 0 to 3 and that want to get together and do 2 group classes a week and then 1 home visit every other week to learn more about child development for their children. And it's a beautiful program because it starts getting the children ready for then what is to come, preschool. And so we kind of started to design our own little pipeline into our Bucecito, which was great. And it supported women in our community to be able to connect with other women and just continue to work together to foster those learning spaces for their own children. And from that program, from the Bucecito program, we also noticed that we had a lot of FFN providers who, family, friends, and neighbors, who would, you know, bring kiddos onto the bus, and they weren't their parents, but they were their primary caregiver at the time. And so, we noticed that there was enough of them that we wanted to understand the informal or unlicensed childcare that was happening in our valley that has been happening for a really long time. And so the bus really set us up for success in creating trusting relationships with our families to continue to engage. And so we actually started our FFN program and started to dig into that a little bit more from the bus. And so those are just a few of the programs that have come out directly from the bus. But, right now we have 6 programs, which are great, and 2 programs that work on supporting all of our other programs. So that's kind of where we're at now.
So moving forward, what do you think is next for El Bucecito and for Valley Settlement? I'm especially curious, you were just talking about the FFM and also just, this idea of putting preschool on a bus. I'm wondering, are you coming across any, licensing challenges, especially with state government and things like that? Sounds like there might be some red tape, maybe not.
Yeah, it's all so new for us. And this will be the first year that we are able to be licensed as a preschool. And so that's been a whole new learning curve for us. And you guys will see here, our beautiful teacher who is here is Carla Reyes, who is the manager actually of the preschool bus, and she can't be here today, so I'm filling in for her. But there's been a lot of learning. Prior to that, we were operating under a waiver. But we're really exciting because this will definitely change the dynamic for the bus to be able to be licensed. We really went from 1 bucecito in 2012 to 3 bucecitos fairly quickly, and increased classroom time from 3 hours a week to 5 hours a week. And, right now we are really lucky to be able to work with 96 children and their families each year, which is amazing. And one of the things that we've heard from parents continuously is that they would like for their children to have more time in the classroom. And so because we're all about listening and trying to adapt as much as we can to fit the needs of our families, this year we were able to pilot an extended hours model where children spend 10 hours in the classroom in preparation for a full program expansion over the next 5 years. And the state of Colorado and their newly formed Department of Early Childhood are currently implementing a universal pre-K program where there'll be funding available for 10 to 15 hours of preschool a week for children who are 4 years old and some children who are 3 years old. So this future funding will really allow us to expand the program and bring more hours to children in response to parents' voices, and just continue to have that kind of sustainability as well for funding for our program. So it's been exciting.
That's really exciting. And I feel like I already got a couple of story ideas from you on that front. So looking forward to see what's next for you. And also it seems like there are some exciting things happening in Colorado with early childhood learning. So thank you again, Kenya.
Of course. Thank you.
Great. Up next, we have Jennifer Headley Norman. She's president of First Steps Kent, an independent nonprofit leading a community-wide effort to build a comprehensive early childhood system in Kent County, Michigan, bringing families more than 25 years of experience as an advocate for children and families. Jennifer, thanks again.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you, Lee, for having me.
Yeah. So first of all, tell us about Ready by 5 Early Childhood Millage in Kent County. What was the catalyst for this?
When I heard Kenya talking, it reminded me of our story, and I would say we are similar to those who are joining us this afternoon, that our story has been decades in the making. Really, in the 1990s, our community started to have some dedicated conversations. They started to reflect on some data that was available, starting out in a space that was related to just child well-being and welfare, then evolved into a more robust conversation and understanding that dedicated funding and sustained funding within early childhood allows us to get the outcomes that we want. And so ours was the culmination of admiring data and having conversations for decades. And then the community saying, enough, it's time for us to do something big, do something significant so that we can make sure that children are healthy and on track to enter kindergarten.
Yeah, and that does seem like that is actually our kind of accidental theme of the day is sustained funding. We're going to talk about that a little bit with New Mexico as well. So when you talk about that's something big that you needed to do, that was this property tax. Tell me a little bit, how did you convince voters in a very red county to vote for a property tax increase? What was the process for getting voter and community support on that?
That's a great question. And I'm sure that's one that many are thinking about too and reflecting on in their communities. I think the key to our success was really approaching everything with a bipartisan lens. When you start to do this work and make those critical decisions, are we going to move into a space that we're asking for a dedicated, in our case here in Michigan, we have something called a millage. It's levying property tax. And then we have a duration of time of 6 years for our particular millage that we're doing those collections annually. So it's about doing your research, doing a gap analysis, finding out where are there gaps within our system. It has always been important to us that we don't want to replicate or recreate programs or services. It's about us being the backbone, us really serving as the connectors, the conveners. And so we're able to help individuals navigate a space and understand the quality programs and services that are already available in our community. And so when you talk about, the political climate and the nonpartisan approach, it's about developing a rapport, building relationships with those individuals that are the decision makers in your community. We were able to do that successfully in a couple different ways. One, it was getting out and educating the community so that they understood that there was a need and what we needed to do to be able to close those gaps. Again, it's related to disparities or inequities within a system here in Kent County, making sure that all children have appropriate access to these things. And so developing those relationships and those conversations are connected to what we had was a commission. So we had a group of individuals who were representing our community and philanthropic areas, business community, who were able to go into these spaces. And when they speak up, we're able to get the attention and the notice of individuals from a bipartisan standpoint. So it was some behind the scenes conversations and dialogue in terms of education. It was then coming in front of a county group of commissioners and making a compelling argument. I think it's an easy sell when you talk about you want babies to be healthy, you want children developmentally on track, and you want everyone to be ready for kindergarten. That's something everybody can agree on. It's those nuances when you start talking about collecting property tax and other things that can make things a little trickier. But again, if you can prove through data, through conversations and relationships, and really elevating parent experience and parent voice, as human beings, we love to hear those stories. I know I was enjoying hearing Kenya talk about the experiences that families have interacting with her preschool programs. It's those types of things that motivate us to get out and vote and support something like this, because we know in the end, the outcomes that we're going to get are children that are going to know how to read, they're going to know how to do mathematics, they're going to be behaviorally and social emotionally ready to enter school, remain in school, graduate from school, and then come back to our communities as well-rounded citizens. And so those are the types of things that we did in terms of being able to connect and make sure that we were promoting our message and getting the support that we needed to make sure, one, it made it onto the ballot, and two, that it passed when it went in front of the voters.
Mm-hmm. And I think you mentioned the business community. You had the Chamber of Commerce as part of this process as well, correct?
Correct. So we have a variety of businesses locally that have supported us prior to the 2018 vote, and we are getting ready for a renewal in 2024. And so we've already, started to have those conversations about what we need to do. Bottom line, our community knows that this is necessary for us to thrive. If you're going to have a healthy community, you need to have a robust early childhood system that's able to address any healthcare needs that someone might have, to be able to respond to parent questions and parent support needs, to also have a quality childcare system. We can't have an economy that's sustainable if we don't have those types of things. So beyond really our first mission is to make sure that our children have what they need, because it's really a right. It's also about making sure that from a community standpoint, that you have a functioning community that's healthy and a thriving economy. So those make it for easier selves, I think, when you're talking about some of the different things like the Convention and Visitors Bureau or the Chamber.
I'm also curious, we mentioned at the beginning of this talking about, Kent County is very conservative. But I'm also wondering, like, what do the demographics look like there? For example, I used to be a reporter in Sussex County. That's an area in Delaware where Joe Biden's beach house is. And much like Joe Biden, it has an older demographic there, a lot of retirees who were resistant to vote in favor of a property tax that would help the local schools expand. It was eventually passed, but, I'm curious, did you ever come up against any, demographic challenges like that where, maybe people don't want a property tax because they don't have kids, and so you kind of have to convince them a little bit more there?
Sure. So I think there's always a reality in any community that you're going to have a particular group of individuals that, for a variety of reasons, don't feel that having a property tax is in their best interest as individuals or the best interest of the community. I would say Grand Rapids is unique in that we have a very strong philanthropic lens. We very much believe throughout Kent County and the greater Grand Rapids area that we want to provide programs and have supports that are innovative, they're proactive. We were the first in the state of Michigan to have a millage like this, and I think it really reflects the community's vision in terms of, again, making sure that there's opportunities for all children, believing that we need to have this dedicated, sustained funding, again, to make sure that everyone has equal access and equal opportunity to be ready once they hit elementary school.
And you said you were the first in Michigan, but we should mention this was pretty pioneering around the country. You got calls from counties all over the country after you guys got this passed. So what kind of advice do you have for other counties when it comes to identifying revenue for early childhood programming?
Absolutely. The first thing is to know your landscape. Every community is going to have different opportunities in terms of what you might be able to go after in terms of either a tax levy or other revenue sources that might be available in your city, your county, parish, or state. So I would encourage you to connect with organizations, either locally, state, or federally, that can help you navigate some of the policy and some of the governance that is involved. So one, it's getting to know what's even possible out there. Sometimes you might be the first one to come up with some of these new ideas. And so don't be afraid to go for it, because I think the landscape in our country is perfect timing for these things. Oh, thanks. We have some great photos from when we got going with our last campaign. But, it's one, to know what you need to do. And for us, we had to do things like polling, and we had to go and make an appeal in front of a committee that's part of our county commissioners. And then we had to go into a public meeting space and make a compelling argument that this is what was needed and what was necessary in order to go up for a vote for the county commissioners before it could even, the millage language could even be on a ballot. And so there were several steps. So it's One, researching and understanding what your landscape looks like, what you need to do to go after a millage ballot or something along these lines. It's connecting yourself with political strategists or policymakers or individuals that are already in that space. It's getting a coalition of individuals that are dedicated to doing the work that can also get you into spaces and open up that conversation in a more direct way. And it's about, again, doing your research, having the data, taking the time that's necessary so that when you go in front of the voters, you're able to explain why this is important, what you're going to do with the funding, and that will allow you to, have a millage that passes like we were able to do. And so I'm confident that those of you that are tuning in with these ideas in mind, or you're gearing up in your communities, you can do it. It might take you a little time, but there's lots of resources. And connect yourself with individuals like us or the other panelists. We're here to help you. We're all in partnership to make this work move forward.
Yeah, and like I mentioned at the start of this, I think so much of what you just said is going to lead in beautifully to what we're going to talk about in New Mexico. I'm sure Andrea has thoughts about that, especially when it comes to polling and building a coalition in order to get this passed. But before we get to that, just want to ask you, what's going on with First Step Kent now, and what's ahead for you guys?
Oh, absolutely. I had given a little teaser earlier that we're getting ready. We're in year 5 of a 6-year millage cycle. And so in 2024, we will be back again going through a renewal. And what we've been doing recently is stepping back and reflecting, one, on the original millage language. Is there anything that we've learned or we need to reflect on or add or change? 2, it's reflecting on the number of mills. We had originally asked for 0.5 mill. That was adjusted to 0.25. And so it's us realistically looking at, were we able to make the level of impact that we had hoped? Gets a little blurry with a pandemic squeezed in between, but we've started in the last couple of years really gearing up and being able to spend those monies down in the way that we had originally intended. And so it's looking at those things, preparing for that. The other piece is First Steps as an organization. We also have an incubator. And so we have Mainspring Early Care Alliance, which is in the space of shared services. So supporting those individuals who want to have licensed childcare within their homes or group homes. And so we're trying to be nimble within our space and be responsive to what we see in the community. But we've served more than 15,000 children and families at this point. We're connected to about 30 different organizations locally and supporting 40 different quality research-informed programs or services throughout Kent County. And so we're excited about the work that we're doing and looking forward to doing more in the future.
Well, Jennifer, thank you again so much for taking the time to speak with us. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
So we are going to move on to our next speaker, Andrea Serrano. She has decades of experience. She's now executive director of Olay, leading the organization's political and electoral organizing work, in addition to being a published poet and opinion writer. Andrea, thanks again.
Hi, thanks so much for having me today. Happy to be here.
Thank you. So you and I spoke before. I wrote this article that's featured on ELN about Amendment 1 in New Mexico, which just passed this past November. So tell us a little bit about that and what it took to get it passed, because it was quite a long road here.
Yeah, Constitutional Amendment 1, which we passed in November, basically creates makes early education a right for all children age 0 to 5 in the state of New Mexico. It's enshrined in our Constitution. And I would be remiss if I didn't talk about some of the conditions that really led to this idea back in 2010. New Mexico sort of hops between being 48th, 49th, or 50th in child well-being. 25% of New Mexico children live in poverty. We're often first in child hunger, and New Mexico is a 63% people of color state, majority state. And so when you really are looking at the conditions for passing something like the constitutional amendment, you know, all of these conditions were really something that was perplexing to so many groups. It's important to note that from the beginning, this effort really was a coalition effort. There was never really one organization that was working on this by ourselves. This is, you know, an effort that was lots of different types of organizations, member-based organizations, advocacy organizations from across the state. And I think what was really important, that's really important to note, because New Mexico is a somewhat quote unquote small state population wise, but you know, we had this huge need. And so in 2010, and a colleague of ours, who at the time was the executive director of Voices for Children, Eric Griego, had this idea of using a very small portion of the land grant permanent fund in order to fund early education for all children in the state of New Mexico. New Mexico is a border state, but we also are an oil and gas state. And so upon statehood, you know, gaining statehood in 1912, there was this permanent fund that was set up of oil and gas royalties. And over years, it's grown and it's grown and it's grown, and it's grown exponentially. And so when this fight started in 2010, the fund was at about $12 billion with a B. And right now, the fund is currently at about $26 billion. And so this fund already had created a permanent school fund for K through 12. And so the idea was always to take a tiny portion, about 1%, 1.25%, and put that toward early education. And in order to change the Constitution in New Mexico, the question has to go before voters. And to get that question on the ballot requires legislative approval. And that is what was such a long journey for us, was really, you know, there was a lot of organizing that had to happen. There was organizing of communities. And so, you know, growing support among our communities, really centering parents and early educators in this fight, and really growing their leadership, you know, growing allies, and having, you know, events like the 1,000 Kid March, which you see in this photo right in the center. You know, we would do story time in the state capitol, which was effectively a sit-in of a bunch of, you know, preschool age children. You see the umbrellas in the upper left corner. That photo really is in response to legislators who were against this idea. They kept calling this the rainy day fund. This is a rainy day fund. We need to, you know, save it for, you know, when we really need it. And the response on our end was, you know, it's pouring. Our children absolutely desperately need this fund. And there is no excuse for a state that has this much wealth to have our children living in this abject poverty. And so this 10-year journey really was about working and centering and organizing our communities. And it was also working and organizing our state legislature, and really, you know, educating legislators about this idea, fostering conditions for our champions to really grow their voice with this issue. And then, you know, when you had a group of really powerful legislators who were the ones who were the obstacle year after year, it was using electoral organizing to vote them out of office, essentially. And that opened the path to at least have the debate to get this question before voters.
Yeah, that was something I found really interesting about this story. I think it maybe proves that you can do as much, you can try and educate these legislators as much as possible, which you did. You have these, you know, wonderful demonstrations with kids. But the real key, it seems, to getting this amendment passed, and just even getting it out of committee, was by primarying the specific legislators that you said were blocking it. Can you talk about that a little bit, that electoral organizing process, and how that eventually opened this up?
Absolutely. You know, I think it's worth mentioning early on that this was not a partisan fight. This was an ideological fight, because the really powerful senators who stood in the way, particularly the Senate Finance Committee, the chair of the Senate Finance Committee, these were Democrats. And I think sometimes we get really quick to say, okay, so this party's for this party's for against. And really it was ideology. And there was an ideology in these politics of austerity that said, no, you all don't know how to use this money. You want to quote unquote raid the fund. 1% of a $26 billion fund is hardly raiding the fund, right? But there was, these sort of repetitive talking points that didn't make sense anymore. And there was a growing frustration among people who had been in this fight, whose children were now, at this point entering high school, when they started this fight, when their children were in early education. And so in 2020, a coalition of several different organizations from different sort of issue areas and campaign priorities, we formed a coalition called No Corporate Democrats. And we primaried 5 of the most powerful Democratic senators in the state of New Mexico, and ultimately 4 of those senators lost their seats, particularly John Arthur Smith, who was the Senate Finance Chair, who blocked, the hearing every single year, every single legislative session, and it got to the point where we were saying, this really isn't your decision. This is the voters' decision. All we're asking for is a fair hearing. And so when there was a new Senate in place, it still wasn't just sort of walked through. There was still really serious and heavy debate, but at least the debate was able to be had. And ultimately both chambers agreed, and we got onto the ballot. So it was a 10-year fight to get the hearing. And then, the next ballot that we were eligible for was in 2022. And we won with 70% of support. And that photo you're seeing is election night, in the moment that we heard we won. One of our organizers in the photo, a lot of our early educators who have really been at the heart of this fight. That's the photo you see at our watch party.
Yeah, and 71%, I mean, that's pretty much a landslide. I'm also curious, you mentioned there are educators in this photo and everything. I'm sure a lot of people listening in to this panel right now don't come from the kind of organizing and electoral organizing background that you have. So any advice for people that are coming from more of an education background and they want to get, something like Amendment 1 passed, or they want to get, like we were talking earlier about, property tax passed, whatever it takes to get more resources for early childhood education?
So I think there's a few elements. One is creating a really strong coalition that centers the expertise and the experience of the people who are impacted directly, which for us are families and early educators. Early educators are absolutely professional educators, and they are making poverty wages. And so this fight isn't just about families being able to afford childcare, it's also about early educators receiving professional salaries, which they absolutely deserve and then some. So I think that has to be what the guiding philosophy of making this kind of change. And then it's assembling a really strong coalition. I could start naming everyone in our coalition, and I know I'm going to forget some, but I'm going to name a few anyway. It was really important that we were partnering up. So, Voices for Children, Partnership for Community Action, New Mexico Working Families Party, Center for Civic Policy, and then later, other organizations that didn't traditionally work on early education joined on, like the Dreamers in Action and the New Mexico Asian Family Center, El Centro de Igualdad y Derechos, Somos un Pueblo Unido, which are immigrant rights organizations, because most early educators are women, and they're women of color, and they come from immigrant communities oftentimes in New Mexico. And so it was really uniting all of these different organizations and these different voices and different areas of expertise, where some of us had this expertise of community organizing, and others had this expertise around data and really talking about income in New Mexico and where New Mexico gets its income from, and getting that support and that backing from each other. So building that strong coalition, and then finding those legislative champions, because ultimately it was our sponsors of the bill, Speaker Javier Martinez, who at the time was, I believe, Leader Javier Martinez, and Senator Mo Maestas, who at the time was Representative Mo Maestas. They went to bat every single session, and the other co-sponsors and the other legislators who carried this along the way. So there, it really is about those pieces. But I do strongly believe that if an electoral strategy is necessary, that's where having also that mix of 501c4 organizations or 501c4 capable organizations who can also have an electoral strategy, they have to move together. One isn't more important than the other. Both were vital in order to get this passed.
Yeah, and have you had any other, organizers from other states come to you and ask for advice? Because one thing that I'm curious about is you mentioned this multi-billion-dollar land grant that New Mexico has, which turned out to be a big advantage for you guys, but not every state has that advantage. So do you have any recommendations, policy recommendations on, again, where to identify that revenue? Same question that I was asking Jennifer before.
And I think it's about what makes sense for where you're at. And so many states are in these big fights for early childhood education and for home visiting and for ensuring that, early education, childcare, pre-K, home visiting, that they're funded, and each state or each region is figuring out what makes sense for them. But it really is about that strong coalition and those relationships, and then centering the expertise of folks. That's always the advice I give. I can't say enough how important it was that this was a big lift. It was a big coalition effort. There was no way any one organization could have done this on their own. And for some states it is going to mean taxes, and for other states it is going to mean finding other streams of revenue. But it's about what's making sense. And as was brought up earlier, it's also about what's going to make the most sense for your community, and then convincing folks of that. So in our campaign, we had to really ensure that people knew this wasn't a tax hike, and that we weren't going to bankrupt the state. But if we did have to go the route of raising taxes, I think you can message around that as well. It's about alleviating the fears of our communities. It's about dispelling myths that your opponents will come up with, and really having those kinds of community conversations. We didn't get to 70% of the vote simply by just putting up a few billboards. We had thousands upon thousands of one-on-one, face-to-face conversations, knocking on doors. We ran huge digital programs, radio, mail, television commercials, and this was these were multilingual campaigns, because New Mexico isn't just English language, Spanish language state. There are several different indigenous tribes who all have their own dialects. There are several Asian communities. There are other communities. So it was important that this was also a multilingual effort, a multicultural effort, and a multi-generational effort.
So now that this amendment is passed, what's next?
Implementation, which is, even though it was this 12-year journey to get the amendment passed, that really was step one. And now it really is like, it is looking at how do you implement this new fund, and how do you implement the dollars, and how do you make sure that you're still having input from the folks who we centered in our campaigns. How are we ensuring that they have a voice in the legislature? And in some ways, I don't want to say it's starting from scratch. That wouldn't be accurate, but it does feel like it's starting that second step of, again, getting into some pretty rigorous debate, because there are very different ideas of what childcare means, and should we put all of this money into pre-K? And pre-K has long been a priority of the state of New Mexico and our funding, but that isn't the only need that families have. And putting money only into pre-K doesn't ensure that early educators receive the raises that they deserve. So it really is about wrestling with these really tough concepts and educating folks on these really tough concepts, and mobilizing our community to still continue having a presence. It's one of those things, like, I know we just had this 12-year fight, and now we need to do this again. But I think one of the pieces that's been so important is to be really joyful, and to understand the magnitude of what we did in New Mexico for ourselves. It's really easy to say, oh, okay, we won, now let's talk about the legislative session. But what's been really important about spaces like this today is to be able to reflect and talk about, oh wow, this was big, and how do we sustain this effort toward implementation with the same big joyous energy that we carried throughout the campaign. And it wasn't always joyous, and it isn't always joyous now, and there's frustrations along the way, and there's disagreements, and it's being able to build a strong coalition so that when you have the disagreements, you can work through them and still get to that place of moving forward.
Yeah, and all the challenges that you mentioned, particularly on early educator pay, we're finding those all around the country.
Yeah.
I told a story a few months ago about early childhood educators in Hawaii. So that's a fight that they're taking up soon as well. I'm going to open it up to the rest of the panel. Andrea, thank you again.
Thank you.
So looking forward to talking to everybody now. So I think we have everyone open here. Great. So I'll just kick it off here. What are the challenges you face? Jennifer, maybe you can start here talking about improving accessibility.
So if we're looking at the challenges that we have as an organization and as a landscape, just making sure that individuals can access the programs and services that they need. We really spend a lot of time looking at navigation and outreach, making sure that we're communicating throughout the community what resources and programs are out there, and then trying to use the no wrong door approach so that when individuals are looking for something, regardless of where their starting point is, that they can make sure that they are connected to maybe, instead of one resource or program, multiple resources and programs. And that really gets to what we're trying to make sure that our millage money is connected to it. Again, it's strengthening a system, not replacing things, but maximizing the quality programs or extending beyond what the organization would have been able to do without our support and our efforts.
And Kenya, I'd love if you could talk a little about geographic accessibility here. Obviously, that was a challenge that El Bucecito kind of solved, but maybe you can talk about that a little bit more. Is that kind of a continued issue that you're coming across?
Yeah, no, thank you. We have a couple of other bigger issues or challenges that I'll also talk about, but yeah, definitely, the mobile preschool bus, El Bucecito, was a solution to transportation. And if any of you have ever been up here, it's just a very rural area. And so our bus has allowed us to truly be able to bring preschool close to people's neighborhoods, walking distance. Like, we've tried to really remove all of those barriers. However, we do run into the issues of it is a mobile preschool bus. And there is very cold temperatures here. And so we come into the issues of we always want to have a backup bus because sometimes, the generator isn't kicking on and it's not warming up. And it's cold, and the kids want to be warm in there. We run into mechanical issues all the time. We've got a great partnership with the school district. The school district actually does the maintenance on our buses, but that doesn't mean at 7 in the morning they're going to be able to fix something right away. So we've run into those issues, and people are like, oh, we just need a build more preschools, and that's definitely not our solution. It's continuing to be able to bring and have access to the preschool, but we run into those mechanicals and the feasibility of what a mobile preschool bus actually looks like, and that can be challenging, yet we love it because it allows us to adapt and continue to meet the need and be flexible with our families as families have to move, or just, communities change. And so it gives us that flexibility.
We have a great question here from our webinar chat. I'm going to ask if Andrea can take this. They're asking, I'd love to hear more about the conversations they've had with politicians to raise this issue and their understanding so that they take it seriously and know that their constituents want action. Primarying them certainly must have gotten their attention. For these solutions to become embedded in our society, they have to become law. So they're just looking to hear more about your experience there.
So 2020 wasn't the first year we primaried some of the more powerful folks. And so I don't think they took us seriously in 2020. I just want to say that. And even partners who weren't involved in the primary said, we're with you, but we don't see you doing it. New Mexico also has late primaries. And so the pandemic was already like full-blown shutdown. So we ran our entire campaign through phones and digital. So it definitely got a lot of folks' attention and created different types of conversations. So that's one piece. But one of my favorite stories is that there was actually a senator years and years ago, and he said, I don't understand this. Aren't they just babysitters? Like, why do we need so much funding for babysitting? Why do we need to pay them professional wages? And someone in his district who owned a center actually invited him to spend the day. And to his credit, he did. And he walked out a very changed man, because we all know how hard early educators work, how vital centers are. And he became a really staunch champion after that. And so I think it was that kind of outreach. And not every senator was willing to have that experience or have that conversation. And there were a lot of folks who, really didn't understand why a constitutional amendment was needed when, why can't we just legislate? They created an early childhood education trust fund. So why isn't that enough? And the answer is this: when you have something that's in statute, depending on who's in power, they can change that statute. They can actually they can empty out a fund, like with a simple majority vote. When you have something enshrined in the Constitution, that means regardless of who's in power, you're absolutely bound by this Constitution, this mandate in the Constitution. And so I think it's about having those kinds of conversations. But and I don't mean to sound repetitive when I say this, but I can say these things all day to a legislator as ED of the organization, but when they hear from early educators and when they hear from parents, it changes the attention span, and I think they're hearing it differently. And so I can't say enough how much our members have done and how much their leadership has impacted this campaign.
Yeah, and I'm curious, this question for the whole panel, but are there any stories or experiences that stand out as part of your work over the last few years? Kenya, if you maybe want to start us out there.
I'd love to. I'll be short because I can talk forever. But I'm so proud of the work that we've been able to do, because 96 children and families might not be a huge number. We have like 1,000 children who are born every year in our community, but it's those 96 families who we're really building a relationship with and are really supporting. And it's one of my coworkers just said this morning, it's the little things that matter. It's the being able to speak my language and feel comfortable. It's the I trust you. We primarily work, as I mentioned at the beginning, with immigrant Latino families in our region. And when you are an immigrant like myself, it can be very isolating. And sometimes you don't have that network of support and you don't know where to go. And it can be very scary and there can be a lot of fear, tagged along with a lot of resilience and a lot of bravery. And so, I think we have just been able to shift and support and shift that dynamic of what maybe our education system looked like back in our native country and what it looks like here. And I always constantly hear for people who, for the families who have access to a preschool, I wish I had this for my oldest son, or I wish my 6-year-old would have gotten this. They see the difference that it makes, not just with them, but with how children continue then from kindergarten and on. And so it's just amazing that we're able to provide that opportunity, and that we're able to do it together and just kind of learn from each other. So yeah.
Jennifer or Andrea, whoever would like to lead in there.
Yeah, sure. I was just thinking about some of the information that Kenya was sharing, and for Kent County, 20% of our children are at or below the poverty level. And so we know there continues to be a great need in our community. And when we're thinking about stories, and you can go to our website and read some of the stories from parents as well. But, it's about parents saying, look, you were there for me when I needed you. I was struggling to attach with my toddler or my infant, and you came in and respectfully developed a relationship and a rapport with me. We have trust. And so you were able to help me navigate through a time that was difficult for me as a parent and for my child. And, we've also talked to families that have said things like, I didn't know I had lead in my home. And you came into my home, you worked with me, you removed the lead, you created a healthy space for me and my family. And we know things like elevated lead levels can impact our capacity to learn and grow. And so it's hearing those stories from families saying you were there for me when you needed, when we needed you, and that we trust you to work in partnership with us to elevate our voice authentically and to listen to us when we're telling you that there's things we need in our community to make it better.
Andrea?
I co-sign onto what both Kenya and Jennifer said. I think what's really important also about, it feels like with all three of us, is that these campaigns, which are each different, and these projects, which are each different, they're very unique to where we're at. Although now I'm starting to think about the Bucecito, so I'm like thinking about childcare deserts in New Mexico, and that seems very, very solution oriented. And so I think that's what it is too, is that we're doing work that's very specific to where we're at, and also building this network. And that's been the case, it feels like, all along, is that, our friends in California were cheering us on, and were co-conspirators with us in this work. And we had our national friends and folks who were really creating a space and setting the stage. So I feel like all of those pieces were also really vital, that these are very specific place-based campaigns, and they're all still really just interconnected. And I do believe that the federal fight should continue. I think it was disappointing for all of us when the $400 billion was taken out of Build Back Better, but there's nothing to say that you can't go for that again. And I think it's absolutely vital that federal fight continue.
Yeah, and Andrea, I think you and I talked about that back in November, because by that point, Build Back Better had already failed. And I'm curious if you've talked with people at this point, other organizers at the federal level, other legislators at the federal level, about what kind of strategy it will take, because primarying the folks that might oppose this seems like a huge hurdle. So, do you have any sense of the political strategy on that? Is this a bipartisan problem that you're seeing, or is it just something that one side is opposing right now?
It should be a bipartisan issue that folks are tackling, because I think it's absolutely something that voters understand from lots of different political ideologies. The 70% I talked about in New Mexico, it wasn't all from one party. It was actually across all of the counties in New Mexico, except for four. There were four counties who didn't have a majority vote on this, and these are counties that were both majority Democrat, majority Republican counties. So I think voters, and someone in the chat earlier said something about the power of the ECE voter, and so I think that ECE should be something that's taken seriously and not sort of regarded as a side project or an afterthought. I don't know that I'm the person that can speak to what's the next federal strategy, but it is something that I think I'm comfortable saying it's something we're absolutely invested in, and it's something that we would like to see be a big part of the platform, especially as we're heading into a big election year. It should absolutely still be something at the forefront, especially because early education is something that there's very few issues that I see most people agreeing on. And early education, at least among voters, maybe not policymakers, but among voters, it's something that, that most folks can agree on.
And so we talked a little bit in this last question about speaking with parents. How do you guys feel you've elevated parents' voices? We'll start with these listening campaigns, Kenya.
I'd love to get us started. Listening is so important to us, and it's so crucial. And it's, as I mentioned before, it's one of our first values. We've promised to be an organization that will always listen first. We listen with empathy, with open hearts, and to truly understand others' perspective and lived experiences. And throughout our programming year, it's just something that has really become second nature to us. We're constantly listening to what is working for families and what's not working for families. And, we're very also blessed in the sense that we are able to adapt and shift. As program is going, sometimes we don't have to wait. And then just being very intentional about what we are asking to, and just making sure that, it's really driven by the families that we serve and never driven by us, because there's no way that we actually know. Even when we come from the community, needs change all the time. And so it's just being very important to having that open heart and that open mind to what is happening, and then being able to adapt. And so it's been exciting and something that we do throughout our programming year. And then after 10 years of being an organization, we went back and did an even bigger listening campaign, which I know someone posted on the chat. Thank you so much. Where we did again what our community organizers started in 2011, because we've been an organization for 10 years and we wanted to see, hey, what has changed, what hasn't, what have we done? So it's something that we'll continue to do, definitely.
Andrea, you talked about how educators got involved in this fight. How did parents get involved, and how did you boost their voices throughout it?
In the early years of this campaign, really how Olay got involved in the fight around childcare funding was, I want to say around 2009, the governor at the time wanted to cut funding for support for childcare assistance. And so there was, this really quick organizing that happened and pushback, and really seeing how big of a need this was in the state. And so, childcare assistance in New Mexico back then, and sometimes I marvel when I think about how bad the system really was. It was run through the Children, Youth, and Families Department, and it was sort of arbitrary and at the whim of the caseworkers. So sometimes a parent would get a child care assistance contract for 6 months, and sometimes they'd get one for 3 days and then be told, come back in 3 days and we'll see where we're at. And it was a really abusive system in a lot of ways, I think, to parents who were seeking assistance. And so, really it was organizing parents who were very, very frustrated with dealing with CYFD. Eventually working with our partners at Center on Law and Poverty, we actually sued CYFD. But the change in the administration, in terms of the governor and our current governor, Michelle Lujan Grisham, really changed the tone and the course of the way that early education is regarded. And she's someone who has always been very supportive and been a champion of early education. And so, New Mexico was one of the first states to use ARPA funds to make childcare essentially free for all families who made up to, I think, $125,000 a year, meaning childcare assistance was available to everyone. And so now it's
clarify ARPA funds are again.
I'm sorry, there were the funds that came from the federal government for COVID relief. And so using that money to actually erase, co-pays and make more families eligible for childcare, and now working to keep that. It was meant to be a 1-year project, and so now it's working to the funding to keep that going. But finding parents who were utterly frustrated and then creating community, because once parents started to find out, there wasn't just them, and it wasn't, they weren't the only ones struggling with the system. And I think oftentimes anytime we talk about assistance or needing assistance or folks who are living in poverty, we make it into this, somehow it's a personal moral failing, when really it's a policy fail. It's a failure of policy. People living in poverty is a failure of policy, and policymakers. And so creating that community, and parents really started to find each other in this organization and find each other in this fight, and then began to say, well, wait a minute, I love my child, I love my son's preschool teacher, I love my child, daycare teacher. And so then they started really going to bat for the educators as well. So it's about building that community within the organization, but it's helping people to find their people, right? And in a space that isn't about judgment. And it's very early on saying that we're not service providers. We're going to be organizing, and this fight could take a really long time, and being honest with folks about that and linking folks with service providers. I in no way, shape, or form, I'm trying to say like, oh no, it's not service providing. Service providing is vital. I want to be really honest with folks. Like, this is not a one and done. This isn't going to happen in a month. Like, this could be a really long fight.
Yeah, Jennifer, did you do something similar? Did you tap into frustrated parents, or did you take a different strategy here? I know you talked about the political organizing that you had to do, but again, curious, the parents' role in First Steps, Ken.
Yeah, I can respond to that in twofold, in that when we initially, had this campaign, we engaged parent, we elevated voice, because we wanted to be able to share those stories authentically to really motivate the community for a call to action. What we do since the millage passed is we have parents serving in a couple different ways. And so really from a governance standpoint and a decision-making standpoint. So from a governance standpoint, we have several parents that sit on our board of commissioners. So they're part of our board. They're there to help make sure that we are including parent voice. They are bringing any messages that they have through their connections to the board meetings and through that committee process, so we can make sure that that's top of mind when we're meeting regularly. The other piece that we include parents in is part of our resident proposal review board. And so at First Steps, we have a process where if an organization is seeking funding through our Ready by 5 millage, they submit a proposal. And so we have dedicated proposal periods where they will submit information, let us know what it is that they would like to use the dedicated funding to. And we have the resident proposal review board that includes parents within that group. So they're sitting with other individuals, county commissioners and other individuals that are within the early childhood space, making decisions about, does this one meet the criteria for us to be able to fund this project, and for also for them to be able to help give some feedback about what they see as priorities within the community. And so those are two specific ways that we really leverage parents and parent voice in terms of our everyday ongoing process. I was also looking in the chat, and I thought I might just comment. There was a question about how do we continue to stay motivated, because these can be long and frustrating battles. And I really liked Andrea's comment about you have to find joy. I mean, this is work that it's a space for those of us that are passionate about making sure that children have every opportunity they can. We get excited and we get motivated by the stories that we hear from our parents, and for us to be able to see the number of families and children that we've been able to get to kindergarten readiness or help make that difference in order for them to be healthy. And so it's really those culmination of all those little wins, I think, that gets me excited and gets me up in the morning and helps me get through any time that you have maybe, a frustrating moment or a frustrating meeting. Because in the end, I think truly communities want to be behind this work. It's just about navigating a landscape to be able to create a system like we're talking about today.
Yeah. And, both of you guys alluded to those moments of frustration and then also trying to find joy in them. So curious, again, for everyone, what was the moment that you felt like each of your initiatives were going to work, that it was the turning point, whether that's the electoral turning point or with El Bucecito, more of a, I guess, I don't know, infrastructure turning point, logistical turning point, maybe literal one because it's a bus. So what was the turning point when you guys knew this was going to succeed? Whoever would love to start out with that.
I'm happy to start. I think for us, in 2011, when we had our initial listening campaign, that our community organizers went out and met with just the other local nonprofit organizations and other agencies that were out there and interviewed them. One of the things that we constantly heard was it was really hard to find the Latino community. And so I think for us, that moment was that moment happened when we realized that that was not our experience. Working with the community to design something that really truly worked for them, and that they felt kind of ownership of, not necessarily for them, but with us together, was something that allowed us to truly foster engagement. And it was kind of that authentic space that we were like, wow, we can do this. We can do this together. And it was a moment that we realized that it wasn't actually that hard. We just had to make sure that the people who were designing things, or the people that were going and door knocking or having interviews, looked and resembled the community that they were serving. And that there was this true connection of, I'm here with you and we're going to do this together. And so that was really important for us.
Yeah, Andrea.
So the Senate Finance Committee hearing was on a Sunday in the winter of 21, with a new composition and a new chair. And it was like I said this earlier, it wasn't just sort of an easy, it wasn't an easy lift by any means, but we were all watching on Zoom because it was height of the pandemic, and so there wasn't any in-person legislative session happening except for the lawmakers. And so as I was watching on my computer and watching the debate, and there were some really hard questions that kept being asked, and but then it passed the committee, and when it passed the Senate Finance Committee, we knew it was going to pass the Senate floor. It had already passed the House. So when it passed the Senate Finance Committee, it was this moment of, oh, we're going to be on the ballot. This is it. This is happening. And we're texting each other like, did it just I think, you know, there's just all this sort of disbelief because it was so many years of being disappointed, and to the point where you want to be hopeful, but you also don't want to be let down again. And so that was the moment when it passed the Senate Finance Committee that I said, all right, we're going to win this, and we're going to pass this in New Mexico. And then the work of the campaign began. But I'll never forget that Sunday afternoon. I can actually still see like the light in my bedroom, where with my makeshift office, as all of us had to create during the pandemic. So you know, that was that moment.
I can just add to it. It feels like, reflecting back for this team, there was almost 3 moments. There was one when the county commissioner said, yes, this can be on, can be on the ballot. And then next it's passing at 57%. And then, about a year later was when the pandemic hit. And so that gave First Steps and Ready by 5 just enough time to start to develop a system. And so they were able to really maximize any funding, any resources, anything that the community needed, because there had been at least a base foundation or structure that was in place. And then there were some lessons that were learned, kind of like building a plane as you fly, how, once, and I think that would be a lesson learned to those that are listening, think a lot about what are you going to do with the money when you actually get it. So much time is spent focusing on, getting it out to vote and making sure it passes, but really think about what the process is going to be and how the money is going to flow, because there's going to be some surprises in that process. So that's a lesson learned.
Yeah, and I think, Andre, you mentioned that now you're in the process of figuring out how the money from that amendment, or from the land grant, I should say, is going to be parceled out. And yeah, that must be sort of surprising when you finally get that money after years and years of organizing.
I think that it's, and I think I said this earlier, it in some ways feels like a brand new journey, with some challenges, but there's a re-education that has to happen all over again around why early education is so vital, and home visiting, that, pre-K, yes, absolutely, and that it actually needs to start earlier, and the financial support is needed earlier, and the reality of parents and the reality of early educators. And in thinking about the pandemic, it was, early educators still had to go to work. They didn't teach remotely. They were caring for other essential workers' children. And so they were essential workers themselves. And the fact that people are leaving the field because they can't afford to stay in this field that they love children. So all of that being said, I think it really is working with our existing champions, building new champions, and really doing that education all over again of why the implementation piece is so important.
I'm going to keep this panel going. I know our discussion is really rolling along here, but I really want to take it to some of the questions that folks have submitted. And our poll is also here. So if everyone would like to go ahead and start voting. We're not quite done with the presentation yet, so go ahead and vote in the poll. And so our first question, how can private foundations support more of these efforts? I know a lot of our conversation today is focused on getting public input here, convincing lawmakers at all different levels, but how do you get private foundation support? Maybe you can start with Jen.
Sure. We can talk a little bit about what we do locally. And so we have a percentage of our millage covers operational or core services, but the rest of the funding we have to do through either grants or fundraising initiatives. And so locally, we have a community foundation that's somewhat of a hub of different philanthropic individuals and organizations and foundations locally that you can go to the community foundation and have a conversation about. We're looking to support early childhood initiatives, and they will have a list of funders that they can help connect you with that are interested in supporting the work within this space. And so it's about really leveraging grants, getting to know who the individuals in your community are that are philanthropically minded, understanding if you have large corporations, what foundations they might have in place, as well as just looking at either state or national level foundations that are engaged in this work. And so that's the strategies that we use locally.
Yeah, and we also had a question in the chat, maybe just to drill down to this and get a little more specific. Where would you get the support? I know you mentioned these grants. There are a couple of different websites where I think you can find grants. These are for individuals. I've looked to view them as a freelancer, but organizations can use them too. So if anyone here would like to mention some of those specific organizations or websites where you can go and find the people that can give you money. Whoever would like to jump in first with that.
I think Jennifer had it right on with community foundations. They're always really good resources, you know, for at least starting. And, you know, for us, that funding has come over lots of years, building relationships with funders, program officers who really also believe in the work that we're doing. I think that piece is really important to mention that. And I should have mentioned earlier as I was talking about the team that it took. You know, I think a lot of funders really believed. They really believed in this work and celebrated alongside with us. And you know, small dollar donors, that adds up very quickly. So campaigns for donors, you know, membership dues, you know, there's all kinds of different models for different organizations. I think that's the that really was a big key for us, was just finding those different models.
I think I don't have much more to add. I echo what Jennifer and Andrea have said. We have a combination of community foundations, which I do think are listed in our annual report, and individual donors who believe in what we do. And I think that that's the most important thing, because those are the people that, regardless if the amount is small or big, those are the people that will continue to support. But really building that connection and having that relationship based versus transactional is really important.
And we have a specific question for Andrea. Where did OLE receive the funding for the multi-year campaigning that was required here?
Like I said, just different foundations, different donors who really, you know, believed in the work that we were doing, and who were really, you know, committed to and investing in early childhood education, and seeing that you know, as affecting the outcomes for children. I can't stress that enough, that early education, home visiting, quality childcare, pre-K, all of those things really set up children for their best outcomes and follow them throughout. So, you know, it was really a variety of folks who joined us along the way, and who had the patience to understand that the fight wasn't going to happen over just one cycle. And you know, I think really it was a variety of funders with C3 capability, C4 capability, because it was a mixed campaign all the way through, that really made the biggest difference. And, you know, and also donors, you know, individual donors along the way as well, who really, who were committed to seeing this fight all the way through.
And can you clarify, you mentioned that C4 and C3, I think you established your own C4, C3 here. So that's important for the funding, right?
Yeah, so Olay itself is a 501c4 organization, meaning, we can engage in political work, we can do endorsements, we can do partisan political work. It's also our, where we do our organizing work out of, and then our sister organization is our 501c3, the Olay Education Fund. And a lot of the policy work happens there. A lot of the legislative policy work happens there. And the coalition building for this early ed work, really a lot of it happens on the C3 side, and then the political and electoral work happens on the C4 side.
And Jennifer, again, talking about, the cost of these campaigns. We have a question here. What's the cost of running a campaign like you did in Kent County?
So I can give you a ballpark. Obviously, depending on where you are around the country, the cost might be different. I would say going into a renewal campaign, looking probably about 300,000, and probably about 100,000 for informational, and probably 200,000 for, just to clarify, for me moving forward, there will be an informational campaign that's related to First Steps Kent, and then there has to be a separate committee that actually goes after the initiative to have it placed on the ballot again. And so probably about 200,000 for that group that's specific to a yes campaign, and then about 100,000 in terms of informational or supportive campaign, which would be what the organization would do. And so that would be the other piece. I would encourage you to ask questions and understand, just so, just as Andrea was talking about, that each entity within our organization kind of has a different purpose and a different role to make sure that you're not crossing over each other's toes as you're engaging in this work.
Well, would love to continue this conversation, but we do have to wrap up. I'm sure this has been very educational for everyone listening to the panel. If anyone is curious as to how to start their own campaigns, lots of good information here. You can look at more of our articles on ELN, and sure we'll be doing lots of follow-ups as all of your efforts move forward. So thanks again for taking the time to sit down with us.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today for this conversation. Thank you to the Early Learning Nation magazine for helping us put this together, Lee for your help moderating, and to Kenya, Andrea, and Jennifer for your participation. If we want to pull a slide up here quick, just a reminder to those of you in the GLR community network, go ahead and fill out this What's Working Exchange. What's the word I'm looking for? I just had a complete blank, but this form, if you can go ahead and fill out this form for us, it just takes about 5 to 8 minutes, and it really, really helps us. And then just a quick reminder of our upcoming webinars. All of the information shared by the panelists, the slides, as well as the bios will be available in our follow-up materials. And thank you again to everybody who joined us today for this really inspiring conversation. We hope you have a great rest of your day.